There were surprisingly many people at a passport agency in one of the towns located in the middle of nowhere in northern Texas. Despite the fact that there was a security guard wearing what vaguely resembled a military uniform, the queue stretched almost to the very entrance. People were unhappy with the level of service and exchanged angry remarks about it. The problem was that the employees of the agency, where any of the town's residents could get their passport, worked exceptionally slowly and unprofessionally, which caused the line in the hallway to grow by the minute. Timothy Simmons worked as a security guard there. He lazily scanned over the long line of sufferers and smiled ironically. It wasn't the first time that he was seeing all of this. He was actually used to the neurotic atmosphere, which dominated the passport agency. Timothy was young, and so he felt that his uniform and the baton at his side made him masculine and authoritative. Of course, the young man rarely abused his position, but if he did, then he went all the way. Therefore, Timothy got noticeably tense when a poorly dressed man of about 45 years old with an ugly scar on his haggard, unshaven face came in. Here we go, another beggar. He probably lost his ID at one of the bars and wants it replaced. I hope he won't cause any problems, thought Timothy, instinctively adjusting his uniform. But the man with the scar calmly took his place in line and started waiting patiently. Even though the line moved slowly, the stranger was calm and didn't say one word the entire time. He was dressed in worn-out jeans, an old windbreaker over a faded t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. The man's temples glistened with gray hair, which was evidence of the stress and hardships that he had to live through. When the guard saw that the beggar was acting decently, he relaxed and instantly lost interest in him. Instead, he switched his attention to a long-legged blonde who was giving the tall guy in uniform flirty looks. The line moved at the pace of a turtle that was crawling under the afternoon desert sun. Slowly but surely, the beggar with the scar on his face moved towards the office, where he was supposed to receive his documents. Meanwhile, people waiting in the hall began to grumble again, as the passport agency employees warned them of the upcoming lunch break. "Stop making a scene and keep calm," said Amanda Parker, who had been working at the passport agency for many years and considered herself a valuable employee. "That's right, there's no need to panic. We'll see every one of you, and if we don't have time today, then we'll continue tomorrow," chimed in her colleague and best friend, Megan Brooks. There was one more employee at the agency who had recently joined the team as an intern. Nancy Gomez was a young woman of about 25 years old with a pretty and somewhat childish-looking face. Nancy had no family and spent her entire childhood in an orphanage. More than anything else, the young woman valued justice, and so she always tried to stick to the established rules in her workplace. This is why Nancy gave Megan and Amanda a judgmental look when the two decided to head out to lunch half an hour before the lunch break was to begin. "Why would you leave for your break earlier if you could just serve several more customers in that time?" Nancy asked gingerly. Her older colleagues only laughed and exchanged meaningful glances in response. They considered Nancy to be a naive simpleton and used every opportunity to make fun of her. Megan and Amanda were used to seeing themselves as indispensable, and so they established their own unspoken rules at the passport agency, and those differed significantly from the ones established by law. Meanwhile, it was almost the beggar's turn to enter the office. But Megan and Amanda thought differently and shut the door right in his face. "Hang on, ma'am. There are still 15 minutes before your lunch break starts. Please, I won't take up too much time. I've prepared all the necessary paperwork and references. It'll be quick," asked the stranger, opening the door. "Listen, sir, do I need to make myself clear? We're on a break. Close the door, for goodness sake," said Amanda, giving the visitor a contemptuous look. Sweat instantly appeared on the man's forehead, and his hands began to shake. "Please, ma'am, can't you understand? My mother is paralyzed. She needs her meds at a specific time. Please understand. I can't wait here for another hour," the beggar pleaded, desperately trying to save the situation. But not a single muscle moved on Megan and Amanda's faces. Honestly speaking, they didn't give a damn that some poor man had an ill mother who was waiting for her son to give her meds. Nancy, on the other hand, felt sorry for the man and wanted to help him, but her petty colleagues wouldn't let her do it. Instead of meeting the client halfway, they called Timothy Simmons over from his security post. Feeling that it was his time to shine, the security guard appeared almost immediately. Looks like the beggar decided to cause problems after all. I knew that it wouldn't go down without him making a scene, thought Timothy, furrowing his brow. Unfortunately, wrestling the poor old man down turned out to be harder than he thought. Despite his seeming scragginess and weakness, the man's muscles felt like they were made of steel. If he wanted to, the beggar could have easily thrown Timothy to the ground and taken his baton away. But of course, the man didn't do that and simply went outside instead. Sitting down on a bench, the poor man looked at the security guard walking away and mumbled, "Was it really worth risking my life for people like you?" The entire scene that Nancy got to witness triggered a whole storm of emotions and feelings in her. Not paying any attention to Amanda and Megan's remarks, the young woman left the office and rushed over to the beggar sitting on the bench. "Please excuse my colleagues, sir. They didn't mean it. It just comes with the job. Let me take your documents right here. This way you'll save time and could go back to your mother sooner," suggested Nancy, shyly looking down. Having heard the young woman's words, the beggar's face instantly lit up, and a flicker of hope appeared in his eyes. "Thank you. I'd be very grateful if you could do that," whispered the beggar, brushing off a tear. It took no more than 10 minutes for Nancy to go through the paperwork. The man with the scar had the full set of documents required to get a new passport to replace the expired one. Thanking the young woman for her help and sympathy, the beggar rushed over to the nearest bus stop. When Nancy got back to the office, she was met by the looks of approval and loud applause coming from the people in line. But there was an unpleasant conversation waiting for her inside the office. "How dare you, Nancy? Can you even imagine the chaos that will break out if we make exceptions and accept clients during our lunch break? Someone else will follow that beggar's example tomorrow, and then another one the day after," explained Megan angrily. But Nancy didn't want to get into a verbal fight with their colleagues, and so she dove into work and tried to simply ignore their nagging. Meanwhile, the stranger got to the bus stop too late and still ended up missing his bus. The man was only a couple of minutes late, which was exactly the time he wasted on the unpleasant conversation with Megan and Amanda back at the passport agency. Looking sadly at his wristwatch, the beggar decided to walk home. The man sunk his head into his shoulders, put his hands into the pockets of his worn-out windbreakers, and headed for the city center. But before he managed to take even a dozen steps, a black SUV stopped next to him, its engine roaring. "Clive Morris? Where are you headed in this heat? Get in, I'll give you a ride," exclaimed the driver of the Chevrolet and opened the passenger door for the beggar. The man with the scar stopped to think for a second, and then accepted the SUV driver's offer. It turned out that the huge Chevrolet belonged to the mayor of their small town, lost in the middle of northern Texas. Tom Wallace was an honest government employee, and throughout the duration of his service, he never allowed lawlessness and despotism. He also personally knew Clive Morris, who aside from the horrible scars on his face and body, also had several government awards, which he received from his heroism in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Clive Morris was a midshipman from that nuclear submarine that had a horrific fire several years ago. The young sailors were trembling with fear. They didn't know what to do and were simply preparing to die. And it was Clive Morris who jumped into the fire and by some inhuman effort managed to localize it. Thus, the brave midshipman got burns over 70% of his body and spent about 2 months at the hospital. After his recovery, Clive Morris was discharged from service by the decision of the medical commission. Moreover, the midshipman couldn't find himself on the big land, and so he decided to return to his hometown in northern Texas. Since Clive didn't have a family of his own, he settled down on his mother's ranch as she wasn't able to take care of it and raise cattle on her own due to her advanced age. On the way to the midshipman's house, Tom Wallace listened to Clive's story about what had happened to the passport agency and noted it down. The next morning, there was an unpleasant conversation waiting for Megan and Amanda. The city mayor arrived at their department with an inspector and immediately uncovered several violations. Giving Tom Wallace a confused look, Megan, Amanda, and Timothy felt as if they were on trial in ambulatory court. What kind of chaos have you let reign in this place? Clive Morris is a hero who prevented a world-scale catastrophe in the Pacific Ocean, and you sent him away like some beggar? I think you need to start looking for another job, added the mayor before he left. That same day, the ill-fated trio were fired and left the passport agency with mournful expressions on their faces. The two young employees were hired to take their places, and Nancy Gomez became their manager. Once she was given the position, things got in order at the passport agency once again. She rigorously followed the protocol, and her positive attitude greatly improved the atmosphere of the agency. Clive Morris still lives on his parents' ranch and makes a living by breeding cattle. The former midshipman of the Pacific Fleet tries not to recall the incident at the passport agency, and from time to time calls Nancy Gomez, who had become like a daughter to him. Clive Morris is confident that Nancy Gomez's work is her calling, which means that her life will turn out well.